The captive. The cell was damp, dark, and suffocating. Ketha sat on the cold metallic floor, her wrists bound in heavy chains that seemed to grow tighter with every passing moment. The air smelled of rust and despair, a reminder of how long the prisoners had been forgotten in this forsaken place. Around her, other captives huddled in silence, their eyes hollow and their spirits broken. No one dared to speak, not when the ever-watchful drones hovered just outside the force field walls. Ketha's people, the Rin, had been slaves to the Zerath dominion for generations. The Zerath, a cruel and technologically advanced race, considered the Rin inferior, useful only for labor and menial tasks. Ketha had spent most of her short life serving in the mines, digging for resources to fuel the Dominion's endless wars. But one mistake, a simple stumble, had earned her a sentence to this prison, a place where hope went to die. She rubbed her bruised wrists and stared at the dim glow of the force field door. How had it come to this? Was she truly as worthless as they said? The question gnawed at her mind. Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor. The other prisoners shrank back, their fear palpable. A Zerath guard marched past, its towering frame casting a long shadow across the cell. Behind it, two drones floated silently, their red sensors scanning every corner. Ketha lowered her gaze, not wanting to attract attention. The guard muttered something in its guttural language and moved on, but the tension lingered. Then she heard it, a voice, low, calm, and distinctly unfamiliar. "Hey, you," in the corner. Ketha glanced up, her heart skipping a beat. Across the cell, a figure sat in the shadows, leaning casually against the wall. It was a human. She had heard whispers about humans, but she had never seen one before. The Zerath rarely mentioned them, but the few rumors that spread among the prisoners painted them as wild and unpredictable. This one, however, seemed different. He was taller than the Rin, with broad shoulders and a determined look in his sharp eyes. His dark hair was messy, and his clothes, though worn and torn, seemed to belong to someone who wasn't used to giving up. "What do you want?" Ketha asked cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. The human tilted his head, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "To talk. You don't seem like you belong here." Ketha frowned. "No one belongs here." "True," he admitted, shifting slightly. "But you don't look like someone who's given up yet. That's rare in a place like this." She didn't know how to respond. His words were strange, almost alien in their kindness. No one had spoken to her like that before. "Who are you?" she asked after a pause. "Alex," he said simply. "And you?" "Ketha." "Nice to meet you, Ketha," Alex said, his voice steady. "I'd say we're in the worst place in the galaxy, but I've been in worse." She couldn't tell if he was joking. "You don't look like a prisoner," she said carefully. "Neither do you," Alex replied, his gaze unwavering. "And that's why we need to get out of here." Her heart raced. "Get out? That's impossible. The Zerath are arrogant," Alex interrupted. "They think they're untouchable, that no one can outsmart them. But they're wrong." Ketha stared at him. Was he serious? The very idea of escaping the Zerath was unthinkable. The force fields, the drones, the guards, it was all designed to keep them trapped forever. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered. "No one escapes." Alex leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "Someone always escapes. The question is whether you're willing to try." Her breath caught in her throat. Was he mad? Or was there something about him, something she couldn't quite understand, that made him believe in the impossible? Before she could respond, the cell lights flickered. A loud hum filled the air as the force field door deactivated momentarily, allowing another guard to step inside. Ketha froze, her chains rattling as she instinctively shrank back. The guard's glowing yellow eyes scanned the prisoners, its voice barking orders in its harsh language. Alex didn't move. He remained calm, his eyes locked on the guard, as if studying its every move. Ketha noticed his hands, unbound but resting casually at his sides. There was something unsettling about his composure, like he was waiting for the right moment to act. The guard's gaze settled on Alex, and for a moment, the tension in the room thickened. The guard growled something in its native tongue, but Alex didn't flinch. "Nice to meet you too," Alex muttered under his breath, loud enough for Ketha to hear. The guard snarled and turned away, its boots thudding against the floor as it exited the cell. The force field buzzed back to life, sealing them in once more. Ketha exhaled slowly, her chest tight with anxiety. "You're going to get yourself killed," she said, her voice trembling. Alex smiled faintly, his eyes still fixed on the now closed door. Not today. For the first time in her life, Ketha felt something stir within her. It wasn't hope. Not yet, but it was close. Something about Alex's confidence, his quiet defiance, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe someone always escaped. The escape plan. The cold hum of the force field doors was a constant reminder of their captivity. Days blurred into nights, and for most of the prisoners, time had lost all meaning. But for Ketha, something had changed. Ever since the human named Alex had spoken to her, her mind was restless. His words, sharp and filled with confidence, echoed in her thoughts like a stubborn ember refusing to die. Across the cell, Alex sat with his back against the wall, his eyes scanning the guards' patrol patterns. It wasn't casual observation. It was calculated, methodical. He watched every drone sweep, every shift in the guards' routes, as though he was piecing together a puzzle only he could see. Ketha hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her worn-out tunic. Finally, she worked up the courage to approach him. "Why do you watch them so closely?" she asked, keeping her voice low to avoid the drone sensors. Alex glanced up, his expression calm yet sharp. "Because they're predictable. That's their weakness." Predictable. Ketha frowned. "They have drones, weapons, and force fields. You've seen what happens to anyone who resists." Alex leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That's exactly why they'll lose. They rely too much on their tech. They don't think anyone would dare to fight back. That arrogance blinds them." She wanted to dismiss his words, to tell him he didn't understand the Zereth like she did. But there was something about the way he spoke, a quiet certainty that made her pause. "What's your plan?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Alex smiled faintly. "You're assuming I have one." Ketha's brow furrowed. "You don't." "I didn't say that," Alex replied, his tone teasing. "I'm just waiting for the right moment. And for the right people." "The right people." "People who want freedom more than they fear the Zereth," he said, his gaze steady. "Like you." Ketha blinked, startled. "Me? I'm no fighter. I'm just trying to survive." "Survival's a good start," Alex said, leaning back. "But surviving isn't living." "Not really. You want to get out of here. I can see it in your eyes. You just don't believe it's possible yet." She opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. Was he right? Did she truly want more than the meager scraps of existence the Zereth allowed her? Before she could answer, the lights flickered again, signaling the arrival of a guard patrol. Ketha instinctively moved back to her corner, but Alex stayed where he was, completely unfazed. Two Zereth guards marched into the corridor, their glowing yellow eyes scanning the prisoners. Behind them, a maintenance drone buzzed along the ceiling, emitting sharp bursts of light as it checked for structural weaknesses in the walls. Alex's eyes narrowed. He watched the drone with particular interest, his mind racing. When the guards left and the force field doors sealed shut again, he turned back to Ketha. "See that drone?" he asked. She nodded cautiously. "What about it?" "It's part of their maintenance system," Alex explained. "It scans the structure for weak points, places where the walls or force fields might need repairs. If we can figure out where it reports those weak points." Her eyes widened. You're thinking we could use one to escape. Not just thinking, Alex said, his voice firm. Planning. They'd grown too reliant on their tech. That drone could be our key out of here. Ketha's heart raced. The idea was absurd, reckless, and almost certainly doomed to fail. But the way Alex spoke made it sound possible. How would we even get close to it? She asked. We don't, Alex said with a sly grin. We make it come to us. Before she could press him further, another voice interrupted. You're both insane. Ketha turned to see a tall, wiry alien with pale green skin and 4 narrow eyes glaring at them from across the cell. He was one of the older prisoners, a Sinar named Draz. He had been here longer than anyone else, his body scarred from countless punishments. Do you know how many fools I've seen try to escape this place? Draz sneered. Too many. All of them dead. Alex didn't flinch. Then maybe they didn't try hard enough. Draz snorted. And what makes you think you're different, human? Alex stood slowly, his calm demeanor suddenly carrying an edge of authority. Because I've escaped worse than this, and because I'm not afraid to fail. The other prisoners watched in silence, their eyes darting between Alex and Draz. Even Ketha felt the tension in the air, a strange mixture of doubt and hope. Draz stared at Alex for a long moment before shaking his head. You're going to get yourself killed, and anyone foolish enough to follow you. Maybe, Alex said with a shrug, but at least I'll die fighting. What about you? Draz didn't respond. He turned away, muttering under his breath. Ketha looked back at Alex, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and admiration. You're serious about this, aren't you? Dead serious, Alex replied. But I can't do it alone. Are you in? She hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of doubts. But deep down, a spark had been lit, a tiny flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. All right, she said finally, her voice steady. I'm in. Alex smiled, the kind of smile that could turn fear into courage. Good. Now let's figure out how to make this work. For the first time in her life, Ketha felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was close. The breakout. The cell was quieter than usual, but the air buzzed with a tension that wasn't there before. Ketha sat in her usual corner, the heavy chains on her wrists now feeling lighter, not because they had loosened, but because her mind was elsewhere. Alex had planted a seed, an idea so outrageous it refused to let her rest. Alex, as always, was calm. He crouched near the force field door, carefully scratching markings into the dusty floor with a shard of metal he had smuggled from the repair drone the day before. Ketha watched as he sketched out the guard patrol patterns, the drone's maintenance route, and something that resembled the prison's layout. It amazed her how much he had memorized in such a short time. Are you sure about this? Ketha finally asked, breaking the silence. Alex didn't look up. No, he replied, his tone flat but oddly reassuring. But I'd rather try and fail than rot here. The word struck a chord in Ketha. She had spent her whole life being told she was worthless, that her existence served no purpose other than to work for the Zereth. And yet, here was this human, someone who didn't even know her, willing to risk his life for the chance of freedom. It was both terrifying and inspiring. The signal. The plan revolved around the maintenance drone. Alex had noticed a pattern. Every fourth cycle, the drone would pause near the far corner of the cell block to recalibrate its sensors. That pause, Alex explained, was their window. If they could disable the drone and access its internal systems, they might be able to override the force field controls. The key to the plan was timing and teamwork. When the drone pauses here, Alex said, pointing to the corner of his makeshift map, Ketha, you'll distract the guards. Nothing too obvious, just enough to pull their attention. I'll handle the drone. What about the others? Ketha asked, glancing at the dozen other prisoners in their cell. Alex hesitated. If they want to join, they're welcome, but we can't afford to rely on them. Ketha nodded, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her chest. She had never been a leader, never been someone others looked up to. Yet here she was, being trusted with a role that could determine their success or failure. The moment of truth. The time came quicker than Kath had expected. The dim lights flickered in their usual pattern, signaling the start of the fourth cycle. The maintenance drone whirred to life, its red sensors scanning the walls as it floated into the cell block. Kath's heart pounded as she caught Alex's eye. He gave her a small nod, a silent reassurance that they could do this. Taking a deep breath, Kath stood and shuffled toward the front of the cell, her chains clinking softly. The two guards, stationed outside the force field, barely glanced at her. She hesitated for a moment, then deliberately tripped, falling hard against the cell's force field. The impact sent a loud buzz echoing through the corridor. One of the guards barked something in its guttural language and marched over, its glowing yellow eyes narrowing as it approached. Kath scrambled to her feet, her hands raised in mock surrender. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to," she stammered, her voice trembling just enough to sell the act. The guard snarled and raised its stun baton, clearly more annoyed than suspicious. But it worked. Both guards were now focused on her, their attention drawn away from the maintenance drone. The heist. Meanwhile, Alex moved with precision. The moment the drone paused in its usual corner, he slipped forward, his movements as quiet as a shadow. Using the metal shard he had hidden in his sleeve, he pried open a small panel on the drone's underside. Sparks flickered as he worked quickly, disconnecting a few key wires and accessing the manual override. Come on," Alex muttered under his breath, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The drone buzzed and sputtered, its lights flickering as Alex bypassed its primary systems. Finally, a soft beep confirmed his success. The drone's red sensors dimmed, replaced by a faint green glow. Alex grinned, whispering, "Gotcha." He tapped a sequence into the drone's controls, directing it to overload the force field's power grid. The lights in the cell block flickered again, this time more violently, as a low hum built up in the walls. The chaos unleashed. Kath noticed the change immediately. The guards turned their heads, their attention drawn to the sudden disruption in the system. Seizing the opportunity, Kath stepped back, her heart racing as the force field began to waver. "What's happening?" One of the other prisoners whispered, their voice tinged with fear. "Just wait," Kath said, her voice steadier than she felt. With a deafening crackle, the force field collapsed. The cell block erupted into chaos as prisoners realized what was happening. Some rushed toward the now vulnerable guards, while others froze, too stunned to move. Alex emerged from the corner, his expression sharp and focused. "Kath, this way," he shouted, motioning toward a service hatch the drone had revealed. Kath hesitated only for a moment before running toward him. Behind her, the sounds of fighting and shouting filled the air. She didn't look back. The narrow escape. The service hatch led to a narrow maintenance tunnel, barely large enough for them to crawl through. Alex went first, guiding the way with the drone's dim light. Kath followed close behind, her chains clinking with every movement. "Where does this lead?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Out of the cell block," Alex replied. "But we'll still have to get past the main security hub. Stay close." The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually they emerged into a larger chamber filled with blinking consoles and surveillance monitors. Alex motioned for Kath to stay back as he approached one of the terminals. "This is it," he said, his fingers flying across the console's interface. "I can disable the alarms from here, but it'll only buy us a few minutes." "What about the others?" Kath asked, glancing back toward the tunnel. Alex paused, his expression somber. "If they're smart, they'll follow. But we can't wait for them." Kath nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt something other than fear. She felt alive, hunted, The maintenance tunnel opened into a cavernous space, dimly lit by flickering lights embedded in the ceiling. Ketha stepped out behind Alex, her eyes adjusting to the eerie half-light. The stale air was laced with the scent of burnt metal, and faint echoes of distant alarms bounced off the walls. "We're not safe yet," Alex muttered, his voice low but steady. He turned to Ketha, his expression firm. "Stay close. If you hear anything, drones, guards, signal me." She nodded, clutching the broken chain still dangling from her wrist. It felt more like a weapon now, a makeshift tool for survival. Behind them, faint whispers and muffled footsteps echoed from the tunnel. A handful of prisoners had followed, their faces etched with fear and desperation. "Is this where we escape?" One of them, a burly alien with scales glistening under the light, asked nervously. "Not yet," Alex replied, scanning the room. His gaze landed on a rusted hatch on the far wall. "That's the way out of this sector, but it won't be easy." Ketha glanced at the hatch, her stomach twisting. It looked old and barely functional, but something about the way Alex moved toward it told her he had a plan. The chase begins. As Alex worked on prying the hatch open, a sudden noise broke the uneasy silence, a sharp mechanical whirring. Ketha froze. She recognized the sound immediately. Zerath patrol drones. "They found us," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Alex didn't look up. "Keep calm. They'll sweep the room first. We got about 30 seconds before they scan this area." 30 seconds. One of the prisoners hissed. "That's not enough time." "It's enough if you stop talking and listen," Alex snapped, his tone cutting through the rising tension. He tossed a piece of broken piping to Ketha. "Hold this. If they get close, hit the sensor on their underside. It'll knock them offline for a few seconds." Ketha gripped the pipe tightly, her palms slick with sweat. The whirring grew louder, and moments later, 2 drones hovered into view, their red sensors glowing like malevolent eyes. The first drone swept the far side of the room, its spotlight scanning the walls and floor. The second moved closer, its mechanical arm extending as it inspected the area near the hatch. Alex stayed crouched, his movements slow and deliberate as he worked on bypassing the hatch's lock. Ketha's heart pounded. The drone was only a few feet away now, its sensors swiveling toward them. She tightened her grip on the pipe, her mind racing. "Wait for it," Alex whispered, barely audible. The drone's sensor focused on her, emitting the sharp beep. Ketha didn't think. She swung the pipe with all her strength. The impact sent the drone spiraling, its red light flickering as it crashed to the ground in a shower of sparks. "Nice hit," Alex said without looking up. The second drone whirred, its spotlight snapping toward them. Ketha braced herself, but before it could react, Alex yanked a loose wire from the hatch and hurled it like a lasso. The wire wrapped around the drone's arm, short-circuiting it with a loud crack. The drone dropped to the floor, lifeless. "Done," Alex said, pulling the hatch open with a grunt. He motioned for the others. "Move, now." Into the abyss. The group scrambled through the hatch, entering a long, dimly lit tunnel that sloped downward. The air was colder here, carrying the faint smell of oil and decay. The sound of their footsteps echoed ominously, each step a reminder of how exposed they were. "Where does this lead?" Ketha asked, glancing over her shoulder. "To the lower levels," Alex replied. "They're less secure but still patrolled. If we can get through without triggering any more alarms, we might have a shot at reaching the docks." "The docks?" Alex nodded. "Every Zerath facility has an emergency hangar. It's where they keep their ships. If we can steal one, we're out of here." His words filled her with equal parts hope and dread. Stealing the Zerath ship sounded impossible. Then again, so had escaping the cell block. The ambush. The tunnel widened into a massive chamber filled with towering stacks of machinery and crates. Alex raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. He scanned the room, his eyes narrowing. "They'll expect us to come this way," he said quietly. Stay low and don't touch anything." The group moved cautiously, weaving between the stacks of crates. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the facility's machinery. Ketha stayed close to Alex, her senses on high alert. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the chamber. One of the prisoners had knocked over a metal crate. "Run!" Alex shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. The chamber erupted into chaos. Guards poured in from the far side, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. Drones descended from the ceiling, their sensors locking onto the fleeing prisoners. Ketha ducked behind a stack of crates, her chest heaving as she tried to calm her racing heart. She spotted Alex ahead, using a discarded metal panel as a makeshift shield. "Over here," he yelled, motioning for her to follow. She darted toward him, narrowly avoiding a drone spotlight. As she reached him, he shoved the panel toward her. "Help me block the doorway." Together, they pushed the panel against a side entrance, wedging it into place just as two guards tried to force their way through. "That won't hold for long," Alex said, his tone grim. "We need to move." A desperate gamble. The group, now smaller in number, raced toward an open corridor on the other side of the chamber. The sound of pursuing guards grew louder with every step. "We're not going to make it," one of the prisoners panted. "Yes, we will," Alex said, his voice firm. "Keep going." They rounded a corner and came face to face with a dead end. A massive ventilation shaft loomed above them, its cover hanging loose. Alex turned to the group. "Up there. It leads straight to the docks." "How do we get up?" Ketha asked, her voice laced with urgency. Alex pointed to a stack of crates nearby. "We climb." The group scrambled to stack the crates, their movements frantic. Ketha climbed first, her hands trembling as she pulled herself into the shaft. Alex was the last to go, his gaze lingering on the corridor behind them. As he hoisted himself up, the sound of Zereth guards filled the air. One of them fired, the energy bolt narrowly missing Alex's foot as he disappeared into the shaft. The pursuit continues. The ventilation shaft was narrow and suffocating, but it provided a temporary reprieve from the chaos below. Alex led the way, his movements swift and deliberate. "We're close," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once we're at the docks, it's all or nothing." Ketha didn't respond, but in her heart, she knew he was right. Their journey was far from over, and the Zereth would stop at nothing to hunt them down. For now, all she could do was follow Alex and hope that his plan would hold, because failure meant more than capture. It meant the end. The rebel spark. The stolen Zereth transport hummed with latent energy, its engines vibrating through the metal floors as the ship sped away from the prison moon. Inside the cramped cockpit, Alex gripped the controls, his sharp eyes scanning the vast expanse of space ahead. Beside him, Ketha sat silently, her chest still heaving from the chaos they'd just escaped. Behind them, the other prisoners huddled in the cargo bay, their faces pale with exhaustion, but alive with a flicker of something new, hope. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the ship's navigation systems. Then Alex broke the silence. "They'll come after us," he said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "The Zereth don't take well to losing, especially not to prisoners." Ketha nodded, gripping the armrests of her seat. "What do we do now? We can't outrun them forever." Alex glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We won't have to. But we need to make a choice. Do we stay fugitives, or do we fight back?" The question hung heavy in the air. Ketha's first instinct was to reject the idea. Fight back, against the Zereth. It was madness. Yet, as she looked at Alex's resolute face, she felt a strange pull, a spark that had been ignited ever since their escape began. The plan to fight. The ship's autopilot engaged. Alex stood and addressed the group gathered in the cargo bay. The prisoners, a ragtag mix of alien races and battered survivors, turned their weary eyes toward him. "We're not just running," Alex began, his voice steady but carrying a quiet intensity. The Zerath will track us, hunt us down, and throw us back in chains. But if we hit them first, if we make them fear us, they won't see us as victims anymore. They'll see us as a threat. A murmur rippled through the group. Most looked doubtful, but a few, including Ketha, seemed intrigued. One prisoner, a tall Sinar named Draz, crossed his arms. "And how exactly do you plan to fight them?" "They've got armies. We've got—" "What?" "A stolen ship and bruised fists." Alex met Draz's skeptical gaze. "We don't need to match their strength. We just need to be smarter. The Zerath rely on control, on fear. If we can disrupt that, even a little, we can spark something bigger." "Bigger?" Ketha asked, tilting her head. "A rebellion," Alex said simply. "There are more like us out there. Slaves, prisoners, entire races crushed under the Zerath. If we show them it's possible to fight back, they'll join us." The first target. Ketha's mind raced as Alex laid out the plan. Their first move wouldn't be a grand battle. It would be a precise, calculated strike. Alex had studied the prison systems long before their escape and discovered that the Zerath's supply routes were vulnerable. These convoys transported fuel, weapons, and resources to maintain their dominance across the galaxy. "If we hit a supply convoy," Alex explained, pointing to a map on the ship's holoprojector, "we not only weaken their grip but also arm ourselves. One ship can't start a war, but with the right tools, we can light a fire." Draz, still skeptical, muttered, "And what happens when they send a fleet after us?" Alex smirked. "Then we'll show them what desperate people can do." The ambush. 2 days later, the stolen transport hid within the dense rings of a gas giant, its hull blending with the debris. The plan was simple but risky: ambush the supply convoy, disable their escorts, and steal their cargo. Ketha sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the scanners intently. She had spent the past 2 days learning everything she could about the ship's systems, guided by Alex's patient yet firm instructions. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she had underestimated her own abilities. "Convoy approaching," Ketha reported, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. 3 ships, 1 freighter, 2 escorts." "Good," Alex replied, gripping the controls. "Stay focused. Remember, the goal isn't to destroy them. It's to take what we need." As the convoy entered their range, the transport sprang to life, surging out of the asteroid belt like a predator. Alex's sharp maneuvers caught the Zerath escorts off guard, and the transport's stolen weapons tore through their shields before they could react. Ketha monitored the systems, relaying updates to Alex. 1 escort disabled. The freighter's trying to pull away. "Not happening," Alex muttered, his hand steady on the controls. With a calculated burst of energy, he disabled the freighter's engines, forcing it to drift helplessly in space. The tipping point. The group boarded the freighter, their hastily assembled team moving with a mix of fear and determination. Ketha stayed close to Alex, her improvised weapon ready. Inside, they found crates of supplies, energy cells, weapons, and even encrypted Zerath data drives. "This is more than we could have hoped for," Alex said, his eyes scanning the contents of the cargo bay. "These weapons will give us a fighting chance." As the team worked to load the supplies onto their transport, a desperate voice crackled over the freighter's comm system. "Please, we surrender. Don't kill us." Ketha froze. The voice wasn't Zerath. It was another prisoner, a group of enslaved Rin workers who had been aboard the freighter. Their gaunt faces and fearful eyes reminded her too much of her own past. Alex stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to free you." One of the Rin, an older male, hesitated before stepping forward. "You're fighting the Zerath?" "Yes," Alex replied. "And we need your help." The spark grows. By the time they left the freighter, the group had grown. The newly freed Rin, inspired by Alex's defiance, joined their cause, bringing their knowledge of Zerath systems and space routes. Back aboard their ship, Ketha sat with Alex in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. "You really believe this will work, don't you?" she asked. Alex leaned back, his gaze distant but resolute. "It's not about believing. It's about trying. If we don't, who will?" Ketha thought about her life before, about the chains, the despair, the belief that she was nothing. Now she felt something new. Purpose. "We'll fight," she said quietly but firmly. "Not just for us. For everyone." Alex smiled, the faintest glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Good, because this is just the beginning." As their ship disappeared into the vastness of space, the first whispers of rebellion began to spread, a spark that, with time, would grow into a fire the Zereth could no longer contain. The revelation. The stolen transport hurtled through the vast emptiness of space, weaving through asteroid fields, its trajectory sharp and calculated. Alex, sitting at the helm, had become a steady presence. His fingers moved in fluid motions across the controls, his mind constantly scanning for threats, for any sign of pursuit. Behind him, Ketha stared out the viewport, the endless expanse of stars beckoning both hope and danger. She had seen the rebellion grow from a flicker of possibility to a flame of defiance, but with every victory, the stakes only rose higher. Ketha thought of the way Alex had looked at her when she first hesitated. It had been a look of faith, a belief in something she hadn't believed in herself. But now, as they made their way toward a distant and mysterious outpost, that faith was beginning to take root in her heart. Behind them, the newly freed prisoners, Rin, Sinar, and others, had found a sense of purpose. Their faces, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now burned with determination. But despite this new unity, Ketha knew there were still more questions than answers. Why had Alex been so confident in his ability to lead them out of the darkness? What was this mysterious human outpost he had spoken of, the one they were headed toward? She turned toward him. "Alex," she began, her voice tinged with both curiosity and apprehension. "How do you know all this? About the Zereth, about their plans?" Alex didn't immediately respond, his eyes focused on the navigation screen, but his voice, when it came, was steady, almost distant. "It's not just me. There are others. A resistance. I was part of it before. Well, before everything went to hell." Ketha's brow furrowed. "A resistance. Against the Zereth." He nodded. Humanity had its own war against the Zereth, long before they took the galaxy. Some of us escaped. Some of us fought back. But most of us were scattered or crushed. The ones who survived. We've been waiting, preparing for a time like this. Ketha couldn't help but ask. "And the outpost? What's its role?" Alex's lips tightened, and his voice dropped lower. "It's a place where the scattered remnants of humanity and other allied species gathered. A place for survival. And for something more. A glimpse of hope." Several days later, the transport emerged from a field of icy asteroids into an uncharted region of space, where an unexpected sight greeted them. A station, once hidden, now revealing its true nature, loomed ahead, its worn exterior blending with the surrounding debris. The station's outer surface was scarred from previous battles, and the energy signatures from its engines hummed faintly. As the transport docked, Ketha's pulse quickened. This was it. This was where everything would change. She felt the weight of the journey, the weight of the decisions she had made along the way, pressing down on her chest. The ramp lowered with a hiss, and the group exited the ship. The outpost was a far cry from the polished military facilities of the Zereth. This was a place built from necessity, cobbled together with salvaged materials and stolen technology. The people here wore the marks of hardship, but their eyes gleamed with purpose. Humans and alien races who had been decimated or enslaved by the Zereth had found refuge in this small corner of space, and they were now united in their common cause. Ketha's gaze fell on the faces around her. These were people who had made the choice to fight, despite the odds. They weren't just hiding. They were planning, organizing, preparing. Some of them were former soldiers, engineers, or strategists. Others were survivors, much like her, trying to find a place to belong in a galaxy that had forgotten them. She spotted a tall man with a long coat, his graying hair and deep-set eyes, giving him a look of wisdom earned through years of struggle. Alex waved him over. "Captain Greaves," Alex said, offering a hand. "It's good to see you again." The man shook Alex's hand, his gaze shifting to Ketha. "I see you've brought some company." "We've brought more than that," Alex replied. "We've brought the beginning of something bigger. A fight." Greaves raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "We've been waiting for that fight, Alex. But it's not just about fighting. It's about uniting those who've been broken." A shattering truth. Inside the central command of the outpost, a holographic map projected over the large table. The light from the map flickered dimly as Greaves, Alex, and the rest of the leadership of the resistance began discussing the next phase of their strategy. Ketha stood at the edge of the room, her mind still spinning from everything she had learned, trying to understand the bigger picture. "Here," Greaves pointed to a section of the map, "is where the Zereth have been focusing their efforts. Their new capital is here. And beyond that, they've begun deploying fleets to subjugate entire star systems." Ketha stared at the projection. The scope of the Zereth's empire was staggering. But it wasn't just about the war. There was something deeper, something darker that ran beneath the surface of their control. She could feel it in the air here, among the leaders, in their quiet words and thoughtful glances. "There's more," Alex said, his tone low. "The Zereth aren't just trying to control systems. They're trying to erase entire histories. They're rewriting the past, erasing cultures, languages. And they've been doing it for centuries." Ketha felt a chill run down her spine. "Erasing the past." Alex nodded, his eyes fixed on the map. "It's not just about resources. The Zereth believe in a singular, dominating history. They control the narrative. And anyone who resists that narrative, they erase." Ketha swallowed hard. She had always known the Zereth were cruel, but this was something else. "You're saying they've been doing this for centuries?" "Yes," Alex replied. "Their influence has been insidious. They wipe out civilizations, rewrite history, and destroy all traces of rebellion. They've gone so far as to manipulate the entire galaxy's archives. The outposts like this one, places where stories of resistance still exist, are a threat to them." Ketha's mind reeled. She'd heard whispers of such things before, but the idea of the Zereth controlling the galaxy's very history was unimaginable. They weren't just conquerors, they were trying to erase the very fabric of what had come before them. And now, their control was reaching into the heart of the galaxy itself. The path forward. As the meeting ended and the others dispersed, Alex walked toward Ketha, his expression dark. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "But now we know the truth, and now we can fight back." Ketha stood by the window, looking out at the stars. She felt a growing determination within her, a fire that had been sparked in the darkest of places. The fight ahead would not be easy, but it was necessary. "The Zereth may have erased our past," Ketha said, turning to Alex, "but they can't erase our future." Alex nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Exactly. And it starts with us. With you. This rebellion isn't just about weapons or tactics. It's about restoring the truth." Ketha's heart beat faster, her resolve hardening. The galaxy might have forgotten, but they would remember now. "Let's make them remember," she said, her voice strong. And with that, the next phase of their journey began. Not just a rebellion, but a fight for the very soul of the galaxy. The truth would be their weapon, and they would use it to tear down the lies the Zereth had built over centuries. The final stand. The transport shuddered as it entered a new treacherous zone of space, deeper into Zereth-controlled territory. Ketha stood in the narrow corridor just outside the cockpit, staring through the reinforced glass window. The stars outside were distant pinpricks of light in the endless black, yet they seemed to be growing closer, almost as if the universe itself were narrowing in on them. Each passing moment felt like a countdown, and the weight of their mission pressed down on her chest. The time had come for a confrontation, and there was no turning back. Alex stood next to her, his expression unreadable. He hadn't said much since they'd left the outpost. He didn't need to. The urgency in his eyes spoke volumes. Ketha couldn't help but wonder if he, too, felt the gravity of what they were about to do. If, like her, he was second-guessing everything they'd fought for up until this point. But there was no room for doubt now. There was only the mission, only the fight. "We're almost there," Alex said, his voice calm but edged with determination. "Are you ready?" She glanced at him, nodding slowly. "I don't know if I'm ready, but we don't have a choice anymore." His lips twitched into a faint smile. "Exactly. None of us have a choice. It's time to finish what we started." The attack on the heart of the Zereth. The plan was simple, but its execution would be anything but. The Zereth capital, the heart of their empire, was located on a planet called Valoria, a world both technologically advanced and heavily fortified. The Resistance had intercepted critical intelligence from the Zereth's data drives, revealing a weakness in their planetary defenses. A massive weapons facility that, if disabled, would render their military command vulnerable. This was their only chance to strike a decisive blow. Greaves, the captain of the outpost, had worked tirelessly with Alex and the others to assemble a fleet from the scattered remains of destroyed Zereth ships and stolen technology. Their Ragtig fleet was smaller than any Zereth force, but it was all they had. Now they were mere hours away from Valoria. The final assault was approaching, and they would either succeed in crippling the Zereth's power or be crushed under the weight of their empire. "We can't afford to fail," Alex said, turning to Ketha as the ship's lights flickered. "If we hit this facility, we'll expose a major weakness in their entire operation. The rebellion will have a chance to spread, across systems, across species." Ketha clenched her fists. She had seen the way these people, humans and aliens alike, had fought and bled together. She had seen the fire in their eyes, the spark of hope igniting in places where it seemed impossible. There was no going back. The rebellion was already afire, and if they didn't finish it now, they would all burn. "Then let's make it count," Ketha said, her voice steely with resolve. The descent into hell. The fleet dropped out of warp speed, emerging from the shadow of an asteroid field into Valoria's orbit. Below them, the planet gleamed under the harsh light of its two suns, a world of steel and concrete, its surface scarred by the ruthless hand of the Zereth. Ketha's heart raced as she saw the towering spires of their capital city and a colossal weapons facility looming over it, guarded by a network of formidable anti-spacecraft defenses. "All right," Alex called over the comms. "We hit them fast and hard. We won't be able to maintain our position for long." The fleet split into smaller formations, each one aimed at a different part of the facility. The final battle had begun. Ketha's transport ship was positioned at the forefront of the assault. She could see the glowing red beams of Zereth defense cannons targeting their ships. The air was thick with tension as they surged toward the facility. The ship shook with every hit, but the shields held steady. "Brace for impact," Alex shouted as a massive energy beam shot past them, narrowly missing their hull. The ship dipped and swerved, narrowly avoiding another volley of shots. Ketha gripped the seat, her knuckles white. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of the fire coming from below or the silence of space above. Everything was happening so fast, too fast, but she knew that hesitation would cost them everything. The ground assault. The transport entered the atmosphere, breaking through clouds of smoke and debris. They were nearing the facility. Alex's face was a mask of concentration, his hands deftly maneuvering the ship through the maelstrom of anti-aircraft fire. Ketha could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was about to happen. "We're going in," Alex said, his voice grim. "Get ready to move." As the ship descended toward the surface, Ketha's mind flashed back to everything they had fought for. Every battle, every life they had lost, every chance they had taken. The thought of failure was unbearable, but failure was no longer an option. They had to succeed. The ship landed with a violent jolt, the landing gear screeching as it hit the hardened ground of the facility's outer perimeter. Without waiting for a signal, Ketha was already unstrapping herself from the seat. The others followed, grabbing their weapons and rushing to the rear hatch. Alex was already at the door, his blaster in hand. "Move out," he commanded. They stormed out, weapons blazing, as the heavy steel doors of the facility loomed before them. Behind those doors lay the heart of the Zeret's power, the facility that controlled their weapons, their ships, their armies. This was where the battle would either be won or lost. Ketha could feel the cold weight of the blaster in her hands, her muscles tense as they made their way through the outer halls. The facility was heavily guarded, but Alex and his team knew exactly where to strike. They fought their way through narrow corridors, taking out guards and drones with swift efficiency. Finally, they reached the main control room. The air was thick with the hum of alien machinery, and the walls trembled with the sound of distant explosions. Ketha's heart raced, and the gravity of the moment hit her. This was the point of no return. Alex glanced at her, his face hard. "Ready?" She nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "Let's do this." With a deep breath, Alex motioned for the door to be breached. The wall exploded inward, and they charged into the control room, weapons raised. The final confrontation. The control room was a sprawling chamber, filled with alien consoles and displays. A Zereth officer stood at the center, flanked by 2 guards. When they saw the rebels, the officer sneered, drawing his weapon. "Foolish humans," he spat, his voice thick with disdain. "You think you can destroy us. You think you can erase our legacy. We're not here to erase anything," Alex said, his voice cold. "We're here to stop you from erasing everyone else." The battle that followed was swift and brutal. Alex and Ketha fought side by side, their movements synchronized as they took down the guards one by one. The Zereth officer, towering and menacing, retaliated with ferocity, but in the end, it wasn't enough. With a final shot, Alex dropped the officer to the ground. The room was silent except for the distant sounds of the ongoing battle outside. Ketha approached the main console and activated the override. The facility's core began to rumble, alarms blaring. The system was compromised. The facility would soon be inoperative. "We did it," Ketha whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Alex nodded, but his eyes were already scanning the data. "This is just the beginning. The Zereth will be on us soon. We need to go. Now." As they made their way back to the transport, Ketha could feel the weight of their victory. This battle wasn't the end. It was just the start. The rebellion had been ignited, and there was no turning back. They were no longer scattered fragments of a lost past. They were a force, and the galaxy would remember their name. As the ship lifted off, Ketha looked out at the burning facility behind them. The flames reflected in her eyes, but they weren't flames of destruction. They were flames of hope. The fire had been lit, and nothing could put it out.